Good afternoon, everyone. This is Raquel Bonalso. I am doing a presentation on my literature review. My topic is the effects of inclusion on all students. Despite decades of education reform and increased efforts to promote inclusive practices, gaps in achievement and engagement still exist, especially for students with disabilities and diverse learning needs. Inclusion aims to close equity and gaps in education. However, it requires a shift from a one-size-fits-all to differentiated teaching. I'm here to contend that inclusion is the very definition of one-size-fits-all and not at all differentiated teaching. The roles of instructional leaders in teacher agency, as well as ongoing professional development, is what creates inclusive, equitable classrooms. However, there are problems within those policies and mandate guidelines. Policies promote access, but the practices vary. Often, there are no clear guidelines on how a teacher should facilitate instruction within an inclusionary classroom. An IEP is written, and least restrictive learning environment is applied, accommodations are given, and yet the guidance on instruction is conditional upon the type of professional development the teacher receives, as well as the viewpoints or teacher efficacy and confidence in the own teacher's instructional leadership. The very fact that differentiated instruction can be inconsistently applied leads to the greater breakdown of practices. Additionally, managing inclusion and the compliance becomes difficult when districts, leadership, campuses have a different vision of what inclusion looks like. So, beginning with teacher efficacy, how do we build teacher efficacy? Teachers who are confident and have a positive experiences with inclusionary practices leads to greater success. How do we identify that? How do we build teachers up to where they are confident to be able to facilitate differentiated instruction? The goal is to build teachers that are facilitators and not just content delivers. The concept is to offer more collaboration and mentor services and build professional identity that is adaptive to instruction. There are many different ways a teacher can facilitate this instruction. RTI, MTSS, differentiated instruction, and universal design for learning are all the multifaceted programs that allow or are there to develop or developed in order for teachers to facilitate. All of these include boost engagement and achievement, can be tailored to teaching readiness, and enhancing interest, and building on learning profiles. However, many teachers complain that there's lack of time, lack of training, lack of resources, and the inability to implement these programs. Many of these programs are taken out of context, and leadership affects implementation. We need to think more than professional development. PD improves inclusion, attitude, and practices. However, professional development must be ongoing, relevant, and aligned with goals. How do we make it relevant? Research says Research says that professional development must empower teachers and build a rethinking, teaching the teacher that their role goes from more than just delivering information to becoming a flexible facilitator. Teachers must develop a sense of ownership over inclusive teaching method. Educators strengthen their professional identities and they gain agency needed to challenge the system and introduce innovation into their classroom. In order to do this, leadership must be included in the guidance. Leadership and inclusion go hand in hand. Instructional leadership and IEP implementation are essential for effective inclusive education. Principals and instructional leaders play a key role in managing and overseeing the implementation of individualized education plans. Williams and Lembeck both argue that transformational instruction are directly impacted by how IEPs are carried out in an inclusive classroom. Remember, inclusive classrooms align with the Individuals with Disabilities Act. It mandates that all students with disabilities be educated in the least restrictive environment. The least restrictive environment is often misconstrued by leadership, contending that the more time a student spends in the general education population, the less restrictive he or she is. However, this is not based on student benefit or the type of instruction a student learns from best. It is only based on keeping the student in general education settings. So success depends not only on promoting differentiation and teacher efficacy, but also on closing implementation gaps. Legal and systematic barriers. The barriers are the mandates of inclusion. LRE decisions are complex, context sensitive, and district leaders interpret and apply policy differently. Often, IEPs and the amount of students with disabilities affects campus allocations, and these, in effect, create barriers. Needs in order to close the gaps. Inclusion, instruction, agency, and leadership. These are needed in order to close practice and policy gaps. Requires future research, and leadership agency interaction. The gaps that I found in the research, there's limited exploration of how teacher agency influences policy implementation. There are very few studies that analyze district level leadership roles and LRE decision making. There are inconsistent definitions and applications of inclusive practices and IEP laws and regulations. There's lack of longitudinal data on sustained effects of professional development. And there's minimal focus on the intersection of leadership, professional development, and legal frameworks. Thank you so much. Have a great day.